confidence that we can overcome that concupiscence and that lust, and it will lead to a deeper communion of persons if we overcome it. If we, God forbid, if we maybe hold back and sacrifice something for our spouse, we are ultimately closer to our spouse. And then that's mirrored in our relationship with God as well.
Welcome to the Be Filled podcast. Together, we will explore the deepest desires of the human heart and how our Creator wants to fulfill your every longing. Join us as we explore the beautiful teaching of St. Pope John Paul II on the theology of the body. We are so excited you're here on the journey with us. Open your heart to be filled. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Be Filled podcast. My name is Rochelle Parker, and I'm here once again with my amazing friends. I keep trying to think of other adjectives, but you are amazing. So we have Katie Davis, Patty Strauss, and Sister Cecilia Ann. You guys are sitting in a different order this time. You're throwing me off. You're throwing me off. Okay, so we are just so grateful once again to have this opportunity to get together and talk about John Paul II's theology of the body. This is actually the last of 3 episodes in a section entitled Commandment and Ethos. And in this section, John Paul II has been analyzing Christ's words found in Matthew 5:27 through 28. And they're just 2 verses, but he talks about them a lot. And so 2 episodes ago, we looked at the words, "You have heard that it was said, do not commit adultery." Last episode, we looked at, "But I say to you, whoever looks at a woman to desire her." And then this episode, we're going to look at, "has already committed adultery with her in his heart." And this is found in audiences 42 and 43. So to get us started, we'll look at audiences 42.1 to 42.4, just a couple paragraphs to get us going. John Paul II begins by explaining why we've been looking at these verses separately, or these pieces of the verses separately, and then also the importance of putting them back together. He does this quite often, where he'll sort of like pause and be like, "In case you're wondering why we're doing this, let me explain this to you." And I think that's really cool. He anticipates the questions that people might have, and answers that. So he says that these individual parts are very important to understand on their own. They bring with them their own importance, but also that each of the parts have to be understood with each other as well, in direct relation with each other. And so he talks about that a little bit. Then he also reminds us that the people Jesus was speaking to, they've lost the meaning or the values originally intended by the Creator when he gave the commandments, specifically the command to not commit adultery. And John Paul II says we need to rediscover those values in order to understand how to live out this command fully. And then he goes on to point out the significance of Christ's style and logical structure in his comments, which shift when he starts talking about adultery in the heart. And I'm hoping that maybe our English teacher can explain that a little bit, because I was like, narrative to narrative affirmative. I don't know what this all means. I'm sure I used to know these things, but if you don't use it, you lose it, as they say. So then he goes on to say that the key expression here for understanding the new ethos that Christ came to bring is has committed adultery in the heart. So that's where we're going in this episode. So I'm excited to hear what stuck out to you guys. Sister, would you like to go first?
Sure. I love when I read this, I thought, Jesus is really clarifying the unsaid. Not only is, in this case, the physical act of adultery wrong, but also even the deliberate thought and desire of such is wrong. And so when we talk about the narrative to narrative affirmative, he uses a lot of examples and a lot of stories, that's the narrative, and then to affirm the truth. And he says that we've lost the meaning. And so he's using, examples to help us come back not only to the letter of the law, but to the spirit of the law. Because that's, when we're teaching children about, the commandments, and we say, "Thou shalt not kill." Well, they get that, they understand don't kill, But then you go through the whole idea, even calling somebody a name or ruining somebody's reputation, holding a grudge against someone, how those things can kill the spirit in you, can kill someone's life, can kill their reputation, even without physically harming them. It can harm them spiritually and emotionally and so forth. I know in every school I've taught at, there's a rule about not chewing gum. That's a good rule. Okay? When kids would ask about that, they say, why do we have to have this rule? Usually I say, feel under your desk, and then they find gum. I said, that's why we have the rule. But so I tell them, they said, well, what if I came into the room and I was just sucking on the gum? Is that okay? I'm like, no, I'm still going to make you throw it out. Because now we put ourselves into a situation that is almost a temptation. I've put myself someplace in a spirit that it will lead to chewing that gum. So I want to even protect you from putting yourself next to something that is wrong. And so that's what Jesus is helping us do. Not only is a physical act of adultery wrong, but even putting ourselves in juxtaposition to leading something that could be wrong is what he's trying to safeguard us against. And so I kind of see that. We know that rules are given to us by God to help us to lead to justice and to realign humanity for what God's original intention in creation was all about. So that's kind of what I focused on.
Yeah, I saw that. Well said. Because I feel like that too, that God's kind of setting the bar, and I think in our society we do that. It's kind of easier to just kind of look at things like as legalistically as we can. It kind of gives us an out, or maybe, I don't know, helps us get more into temptation. I don't know. And because I was just kind of thinking about that too. He's setting the bar, and he's giving us that reminder that you were saying. I could see that, those kids saying, what if I just suck on it? And he's asking us that we do have a sense of when we're kind of mistreating someone. He was talking about that affecting our hearts a little bit, making it more fleshy, making it more real. And like even I have a 3-year-old and a 4-year-old grandchildren, and they are talking to each other, and I can tell when they've kind of devalued each other. They can tell when they've devalued each other, so it's there. So I think John Paul II is showing in Scripture that God's like, no, we have to get more real, and to see that, and that we know that, we have a sense of it. And I kind of had a reflection too on, we teach natural family planning, and sometimes you see that people are living more the letter of the law, and they're missing the sense of the heart, because they'll be like, okay, but I just want to know how far can I go before I've sinned. And I'm like, well, okay, now we have to pull back again. I think John Paul II kind of gives the language of no, keep looking further, look harder, And kind of in the Theology of the Body Institute, we had Christopher West pointed out intimacy, and what does that mean? Into me, see. It's that reminder for me, that kind of concrete thing that I really want to continue to see the person, even in all the letter of the law. I know that that's the bar, but then to be more with a heart of flesh kind of helps me.
Yeah, that's so good.
Yeah, I love how we all have examples, because I have an example of children as well. I just think it's so much easier to see it through children than in adults. And I think it's because we've learned to cover it up so well as adults, whereas when children, when they're doing something and it's not right in their heart, it just seems more obvious. And maybe it's just because as teachers and parents, we know our children, and we know, like, okay, you didn't do that sincerely, but God knows us even better. Yeah. So, like, as adults, when we're doing it not through the purity of our heart, just think about how much He is fathering us and really doing that. Because, the example that came to my mind when I was reflecting on this is like, have you ever disciplined your children from afar? Like, you're doing something, like you're making dinner, but they're upstairs and they're fighting, and you just don't really have time to leave the burner to go up and figure out what's going on. And so you're like yelling, like, what's happening? Why is everyone screaming? And they're like, she won't share this. She took my toy. And so you yell from the back, or from the kitchen, give your sister back her toy. And then you hear a loud crash and then crying. Okay, so then you're like, okay, well, what I'm guessing is happening is she gave the toy back, right?
Yeah. You didn't say how to do it, Mom.
She obeyed the law by chucking the toy at her sister's head. And so it's like just so obvious, right, at that point. And then that's when you turn the burner off. You go upstairs and you look them in the eye and you say, okay, so is that really how we should share? Like, let's look into your heart and let's decide how the proper way would be to give a gift of yourself, to sacrifice something that you were playing with for the good of another. Like, that's really how we should be doing, the parenting. Meanwhile, the dinner is just burnt and, late.
There's blood.
But I just can't help but think, like, that's where John Paul II is trying to lead us. And I love the 3 questions that he asks. It's the bottom of page 294 to 295. He asked 3 questions. He obviously knows the answer to these questions. These are very leading questions, but they also make you like pause and think. So the first question is, how can adultery take place without an external act? The second question is, what possible meaning can adultery committed in the heart thus have? And then the third question is this not a metaphorical expression used by the teacher to emphasize the sinfulness of concupiscence? So he's just like taking us through, right? Every single step of like, can you share a toy and still not have it right in your heart? Yes. And then like, what possible meaning, can it have by throwing the toy at your sister instead of, just handing it to her? That's committing the adultery in your heart, right? And then could this be a metaphor for the attitude that you need toward your sister from love, not from selfishness and spite? And so like he's just walking you through each of those by those asking those questions. And so basically it can be summed up, it's the heart, okay? So it's the thought that counts. What are you thinking when you're doing something?
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, that was awesome, guys. You're so amazing. Okay. I love going last because then I just get to soak it all in. But I don't have much to add to all of that. I was just, as far as, I think it's very possible to outwardly appear, that you're upstanding and you're following all the rules, but like on the inside, things are not going so well. And he was always, talking to the Pharisees about that. He was always saying like, you are cleaning the outside of the cup while the inside is gross, right? And so he didn't say gross, but you know what I'm saying. And so, he's addressing that truth, that often, and I think you're onto something about how kids are not as good at ignoring that heart. But unfortunately, as we get older as adults, we sort of get more used to kind of ignoring that higher calling in our hearts, and so Jesus is trying to like get us back in tune with all of that. And honestly, it doesn't, and I'll give examples later, but it does not feel good to live like that, to like keep ignoring your heart. You're following the big rules, but inside, like something is not right. And I've been there, and I know most people have been in that space, and it's not a good feeling to have that constant like dissonance going on, with your
I would just add one thing.
Yeah.
Sometimes, you hear the phrase, fake it till you make it, and that's not all bad. If you are searching and you're trying to become better, I think that, kind of what Jesus is warning against is faking it and being okay with it. Just living on such a surface level. Yeah. So if you have to practice the action, even though it hasn't come down to the heart, but you're searching for that deeper meaning of it, that's okay, because you are continuing to that, desiring a deeper growth, and not being complacent with just following the surface level. So I think there is a little
really
difference.
Good. Yeah, it doesn't have to be all or nothing, right? That's really, really good.
Yeah.
I love that. Okay, so we'll go on to the next section. In audiences 42.5 through 43.4, John Paul II is addressing a point of view that they may have had at the time, the listeners, and also that we can often have as well. He points out that the two commandments they had that they might have been thinking about when he's giving this talk is, of course, you shall not commit adultery, and then also you shall not desire your neighbor's wife. And from that, you might think that it's only possible to commit adultery in the heart with someone who's not your spouse, right? You might think that it's acceptable and proper that you could desire or lust after the person you're married to. And John Paul II is going to walk us through why this is not what Jesus is saying. And it's based on our earlier analysis of concupiscence and also the dignity of the human person. And so I just thought this was really powerful, a lot to kind of sort through and pray with. But I would love to hear your thoughts about it. So Katie, would you like to go first?
Absolutely. So I think I went back to, his main point about it matters what you do within your heart, not just about physical actions, which I'm like, have we not covered this enough? But he expands really well here, I thought, on interiority. So on page 298 of the text, it says that concupiscence that arises as an interior act on the foundation changes the very intentionality of the woman's existence for the man by reducing the wealth of the perennial call to communion of persons, the wealth of the deep attraction of masculinity and femininity to the mere satisfaction of the body's sexual urge. What is he talking about, right? And
break that down, Katie.
Yeah, I'm like just thinking about, like, I spent a lot of time like going back to, okay, the perennial call to the communion of persons. This is the three original experiences that we talked about at the very beginning. And so I went back to like, okay, let's remember, perennial call, original solitude. Adam was created. He looked around and he realized, I'm different, right? There is no one here that matches me. And so the first thing is, we are not like the animals in that we have to act on every instinct, okay? So that's what he's talking about in that quote. So then you go, okay, so if I'm here and I'm different, I must be created for something else or someone else, enter Eve, right? And so that's then the communion of persons. That's original unity. You were created to be a gift of yourself and to receive a gift from someone else. And so I was just, kind of reflecting on all of that. And then I went back to the very beginning of when I was introduced to theology of the body, which I know God did this on purpose because it was too much for me to take in. God bless the people who are listening to this podcast as their first introduction to theology of the body, because I had to do it for children. It was the summer program we did for our children, and Rochelle spoke my language by just using Disney movies and saying, this is how we'll explain it. And I was like, yeah, for the kids. Can I teach kindergarten?
You did a great job teaching kindergarten.
And so we used The Lion King one time. And that's really what came to me as I was dissecting this quote. Okay, so the perennial call of the communion of persons. We are more than just our body's sexual urge. How is that in The Lion King? So when Simba is with Timon and Pumbaa, I'm picturing like that is our culture. Like, just don't worry about it. Do whatever makes you feel good. If you have the urge, go for it. No worries. Hakuna Matata, right? So something happened to Simba, though, while he was living that life. I mean, Nala helped, let's be honest, and the bird, what was his name? And so he then started thinking about, wait a second, like, I think there's something more than just hanging out and living a worry-free life. And then there's that famous scene where he's going through the jungle and the woods, and then he gets to the water, and he looks at himself in the water, and then he looks up and he sees Mufasa, and then Mufasa says the famous lines, I can't do a good Mufasa voice, but Father Alan Kirshner can, and he says, remember who you are. And so the second that Simba remembers who he is, the original experiences that I just explained, the second we remember why we were created in those original experiences, he knows what to do, right? He's able to get right into the interiority of his heart. And so I just thought, that was beautiful. So anyone that does not like Disney movies, you can find the good, right? You can find the meaning, and Rochelle has a list of all of them that you can teach your kids to obey while listening or watching. So what do you think, sister?
Well, that was beautiful, and I don't know that I can add much to it, but when I was reading through this, I saw it as, God is calling us back to that personal dignity, recognizing in others and recognizing in ourselves. We were created, to be loved, to be respected, to be valued, not to be used. It's not utilitarianism. And, and we have to remember, sometimes it's hardest to remember that within our own families, because they're very safe and we take them for granted. And kind of a funny little story came in my mind as I was reading this. I thought, oh yeah, I remember kind of being taught this when I was quite little. Maybe it was in kindergarten or maybe just a little bit earlier. And I was a roommate to my oldest sister, and we had these piggy banks, and hers was, I think, a dog, but its paw was a little broken. Oh. And I could pull out pennies out of that little trove and put them in my piggy bank. And so I did, And I don't know if...
Sister's confession time.
I don't know if I was very sneaky or not, or anyway, I got caught, doing this. And in my mind, there was nothing wrong. She's my sister. This is our stuff, kind of thing. And but then my mom and my sister explained to me that is not appreciating her, that is not respecting her things. And I was told that I had to give the money back. Well, I had no idea how much it was, so they just took something anyway. But I remember as a kid, it made such an impact, like, oh, even though she is my sister, that she has things that are just her. And I think when even in a family or even in a marriage, we have to remember, even though we are united in this communion of persons, they are still a unique person. And I have to respect their rights, their dignity, and so forth. And they were not created just for me. We have to come back to that idea that we are a mutual gift for one another. And so that's where my thoughts focus. Patty?
That's great. I love that where we're kind of we can forget where the bar is, especially when we get very familiar. And so in all of these readings, I kept thinking, God just keeps reminding us of the bar. He takes us back to the original experiences, and so that we can get there. And I had Mufasa also in my notes too, but it was it was more look harder, like that. Here it is, but
I did skip
look
over that
hard.
part.
Yeah. But when I was like, I just think that's great that the Holy Spirit was bringing up the Lion King to try to understand some more complex things. But I think back to kind of what Sister was saying. So, and even the verse John Paul II was kind of bringing out that we just really want to continue to normalize the higher bar, not to just get complacent. And I really loved reflecting on that too. And we can kind of also recognize that we can keep falling, but that grace is there. I feel like when he was talking about, where did I write that down? On page 96, when he emphasized Romans 8:23. So let me find that real quick. So he says, the knowledge about man that allows us, as we emphasized elsewhere, to unite the awareness of the human sinfulness with the perspective of the redemption of the body. And again, going back to when I was teaching 8th grade, I have to go back to the more simple theology, that the reason that we can be redeemed, we weren't made evil. The original stories tell us that we can go back to that with grace, and that we're not broken, we can be redeemed. And so as I did those, like even in my own family with busyness, I can take people for granted, but I have to keep coming back to, I keep being called back into seeing them as that full person, so we're the mutual exchange of a gift to each other. So I just thought that was important that he said that about the redemption, that we have that hope with grace. We can keep pulling up and not taking our sister's money.
That's so good. Oh my goodness. Wow. Well, a couple thoughts. One, sister, you're giving all the parents with super ornery kids so much hope. See, guys, they'll turn out fine. Sister, she's amazing. Super holy and loves Jesus. So take heart, all of you parents out there. Well, I feel like I was kind of on a different track or focused on a different piece of it. But, I mean, one thing was, like, in answering this question about, like, is it okay to lust after your spouse? Similar to what you guys were saying, I mean, Jesus is calling us to this higher standard to love and not to use. And there were a couple quotes that I just wanted to point out that stuck out to me. John Paul II writes that Christ makes the moral evaluation of desire depend above all on the personal dignity of the man and the woman. And this is important both in the case of unmarried persons and perhaps even more so in the case of spouses, husband and wife. And then he goes on to really very directly answer the question about adultery in the heart when it comes to your spouse. And he points out that it's not just who the man is looking at, right? Like how they're related or not related to each other, but it is the way in which he looks. So he says, even if he were to look in this way at the woman who is his wife, he would commit the same adultery in the heart. A man can commit such adultery in the heart, even with his own wife, if he treats her only as an object for the satisfaction of drives. Okay, so this caused a huge uproar, actually, at the time in the media. There was a little footnote about that, and I remember Christopher West talking about it, too. And I tried to find, like, some of the articles and stuff that were written at the time, but there were people in and out of the church that were, like, super concerned that the Pope was saying that all sexual pleasure is bad, right?
Interesting.
Even within marriage. And that's actually the opposite of what he is saying. He's really saying we don't elevate the sexual embrace enough when we reduce it only to pleasure and the use of others. And I was just reflecting about that and, like, what it reveals about kind of what we often believe about the sexual act. I mean, often we just equate it with lust, and we just assume that you can't actually separate those two things. And I think that's where formation comes in, or lack of formation. I think it's fairly common, even in Christian marriages, for people to have been raised thinking that, like, marriage is the only acceptable place for lust. And so, like, just hold on till you're married.
And then you can do whatever you want.
And then you can do whatever you want. And I think that's actually very, very common. And it obviously leads to a lot of problems for people.
On page 226 of the commentary, they do give the Washington Post article.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so if people are interested, they can see that it's called A Lesson on Lust for the Vatican. And so this reporter basically tells John Paul II that he's wrong, and let me tell you exactly what it is, what is correct. And the ironic part about it is he went way over her head, and so her correction is basically has nothing to do with what he was saying.
Yeah.
But she was basically saying exactly what you just said, Rochelle. Like, if a man has lust in his heart for his wife, he won't commit adultery with anyone else. So it's actually good for him to lust after his wife. Sorry, you don't know that, Pope, because you're celibate and don't understand that. And so she was, like, very condescending to him, which she was, again, missing the whole point of the interiority of her heart.
Exactly. Yeah, for sure. I think, again, we've mentioned before that analogy about, we get so used to life after the fall being the way that it is, and male and female relationship, that we assume that's normal, right? We're driving around on those flat tires thinking that's normal. And Jesus came to say, no, let's inflate those tires and show you the way that we're meant to be. And Christopher West, there was another great thing in the commentary where he clarified, people can often think that marriage is supposed to be like relief from lust, as in like sort of an outlet, but he says actually it's the remedy. Marriage is the remedy for lust, that we actually can find freedom and healing. He says that in the commentary, he says, the grace of marriage offers a healing of concupiscent desire. Through the healing power of the redemption of the body, men and women can progressively re-experience sexual desire as God created it to be, the desire to love as he loves in the sincere gift of self. Yes. So I think there's just a lot of people just don't know, that this actually isn't the way it's supposed to be, and that there can be freedom and genuine love there and not use. So, I thought that was pretty powerful. And the fact that people had such a strong reaction, I just think it just reveals kind of where we are, as a people and just our fallen nature. So, and so the next audiences, or I guess it's just a couple paragraphs again. We're only covering 2 audiences this time. But this is where we get into, he's getting us ready to really dive into some very hopeful places about the redemption of the body. But he's setting us up for that and for true purity in our hearts. So this is audience 43.5 to 43.7. And it's entitled Purity of Heart as the Fulfillment of the Commandment. I can't talk because I'm so excited right now about this part. But he says that, but it's not easy to get there, right? We've talked about this before, but he says in order to attain this purity of heart, there's 2 things that he mentions. One is to have, this is a quote, firmness in facing everything that has its origin in concupiscence of the flesh, which I sort of interpret that as you have to make a decision, my life belongs to Jesus, and I'm going to root out these things. The second thing is to know how to be consistently demanding from his heart and from his body. And we can talk about what does that look like? But to me, it's generally just having that awareness of those movements in our heart, our thoughts, our feelings, and submitting them to God in prayer. And he goes on to say, it's possible for the heart to be liberated from concupiscence, and this is a great quote, so that man can shine more fully in this heart, male and female, in all the truth of the reciprocal four. Putting quotes for. Okay, what does that mean? Again, we have to look back. Katie, you did such a beautiful job, summarizing that. And I tell you, that is a gift to be able to do that. That's not practicing. Easy. Okay, because it's not easy to sum that all up like that. But if we look back and we think about this, we are created to be that reciprocal gift to one another, male and female. So that's kind of what we're trying to get back to. And then he talks about how Jesus understands the reality of what is in a man's heart, right? But at the same time, Jesus, this is a quote, carried within himself the mystery of the redemption of the body. So it's he's acknowledging both. He's saying, I know your struggles. I know your heart. I know where you are in reality, but also I've come so that you can truly be free. There is so much hope here. And so I think that he's asking the same of us to understand the reality of our hearts and our fallenness and our brokenness, but also maintaining that hope of freedom from sin through Jesus. And so we have to have that honesty and openness and the receptivity in order to understand, what he is actually calling us to. So,
yes,
Patty, would you like to talk about that?
Yeah, I have so many, just to be able to pull it all together, because that idea of we're driving around kind of with our flat tires, we don't really even know for more. So it's so good to have these reflections and to be able to talk about that among friends that are all trying to strive for virtue and to be more Christ-like, because we do, like we were saying, Jesus knows that we're going to fall, but then in our conversations we can have that where so our culture will actually change, because we do see that as a whole in the culture, and why these podcasts are so important is to kind of start the conversation. No, actually the bar is here. Actually, this is normal, is here. And when we're not truly seeing each other, we're not loving well, we're not feeling that we're loved well, and that has a real hit to it. So, so just that, in my reflection, was the importance of us changing culture with our conversations, reflecting on these very important things that we all experience, but to allow ourselves to recognize by the role models we have with our friends that we fall, but that we are continuing to try to see each other. That's just very helpful for me. In John Paul II's Reflection on Theology of the Body on page 301, he says, he has a little quote at section 7, and he says that we must rediscover the lost fullness of his humanity and want to regain it. So again, what we had said before, the whole redemption, God does. The Holy Spirit allows us to keep taking a step further. And we talk a lot about divine providence. We kind of use that language because, you know, the different situations we get into, I'm so busy with all the children and all my activities, and I don't see my husband as clearly as I want to, but then in the stillness of a reflective prayer time, I'm like, oh, I want to see him. I want to know him. So I pull back up, re-energized to love him well. And then the return, when he feels that love and that return back to it. So I think John Paul II does peel this onion very thinly as he goes over and over it, but I could tell in my reflection going through the reading is that I get it. And it helps me to become more. So thanks for being my friends that help me to do this better. Like you.
Well, when I was reading it, one phrase that came to my mind right away was know thyself. Because when you know yourself, you know your strengths and weaknesses, you also know what you desire. And we desire good things for ourselves. And so because of that, we have to desire good things for others. Again, as I mentioned before, I think when we want to focus on purity of heart, we really have to think about the custody of the senses. What music I listen to, what TV shows I watch, what are the people I hang around with, what values do they have? Do those really align with my faith? You know, we need to guard ourselves against those things that may pull us down, and hopefully embrace things that build us up. We read in John, I think, chapter 8, somewhere around there, the whole idea of that the truth will set you free. So that's what we're always desiring. When we give ourselves as a gift to others, we're living in true freedom. We're living the truth of what God wanted. And again, that truth leads to freedom. And so if we want to have a pure heart is something that's very light. Something that, again, lifts us up. And we are very fortunate that not only did Jesus come to redeem us, but he came to give us an example of what that redemption is going to look like, you know. He was that perfect model. He suffered like we did, you know. He endured the elements of sun and heat and, well, maybe not snow, I don't know, but anyway, different things, you know. But anyway, he suffered like we did, like we do. So he gives us an example. It is possible, okay? But again, we have to know ourselves and to continue to fight that journey. But we have the great gift of confession, and to give us those graces to keep striving for the true and for the good.
Yeah, so good.
Yeah, I think section 7 was my favorite part because, I mean, it's so short, but I thought it was so good. It just packed a punch at the end. So if you have limited time, just read page 301, section 7, in my opinion. But the mic drop for me was the quote, human life is by its nature co-educational, and its dignity as well as its balance depend at every moment of history and in every place of geographic longitude and latitude on who she shall be for him and he for her. And I think the best education that I have gotten on who she shall be for him and who he should be for her is natural family planning. And I think I love, Patty, that you say that we are, lifting you up, but I really think that you and John are the best examples of this. Brent and I had the honor of going through natural family planning class with you, and the main thing, yes, there's tons of science behind it. There are charting and, there's all, you learn a lot about the human body. At first I was like, am I in a college anatomy and biology class, or am I in a class for my church and and so, but what I love about it is it's left brain and right brain. So while we're learning how beautiful and intricate God made our body and how many physical signs there are to what is happening inside of us every month as women, they come out outwardly purposefully so our husband can also notice. And so what I really took away from natural family planning is the co-educational. So Brent can notice things about me that I don't have to use words to communicate with him. And I think you guys described it and demonstrated it so well by describing it as a courtship. And I thought, oh, that is so cute, because you don't think when you're married that you have a courtship, right? Because you're married. And then after 10 years and a few kids, you definitely don't usually feel the courtship. But no, God put this, he gave this to us to keep that, like you were saying, the intimacy. So after we went through natural family planning, we did have a deeper level of intimacy, and we did to pray with your spouse every month, and then to have him recognize little things that are happening throughout the month. And it's a conversation, but it's this very subtle thing that he's noticing about me, and then he's able to react. And he's able to show me love in ways to support me, because he knows what's happening to my body. He knows where we are every month. And so, it's super personal. And so I hesitated to even share, but I'm just hoping that people will hear this and know, you are called to a higher relationship with your husband. And it's not about just passing each other, in car lines and pickups and drop-offs. It's about the only way you guys are going to be able to do a courtship like this is, like you said, to slow down and to notice each other. And nothing will strengthen your marriage more than when you slow down and start co-educating each other. Yeah. Right? About why I was made for him and why he was made for me, and what that gift looks like to give each other every single day. And it just brings your relationship to such a higher level. And Section 7 just ends with the following question: should we fear the severity of these words, or rather have confidence in their salvific content, in their power? So hopefully you feel empowered. You don't feel, oh, it's too much, I have too much going on, I can't deal with this right now. No, you can. It is possible. And this is like the refiner's fire. So instead of just justifying what society is telling us about what's normal, this is just how things are, and it's just how we feel. We can't control how we feel. Yes, we can. And we can have confidence that we can overcome that concupiscence and that lust, and it will lead to a deeper communion of persons if we overcome it. If we, God forbid, if we maybe hold back and sacrifice something for our spouse, we are ultimately closer to our spouse. And then that's mirrored in our relationship with God as well. So by having a deeper communion of persons with Brent, I'm having a deeper communion of persons with God, right? That's the salvific content of it.
Wow. Katie, you're on fire.
I told you, this all happened this morning.
Dear goodness. Oh, Lord, you're so good. Praise God. Wow. Thank you. I'm so glad you shared all of that. I mean, like, I'm not even looking at my notes anymore, but like, I mean, as you were sharing, I was thinking, see, this is what women want.
Yeah, it is.
We want to, and men, I'm sure they want this too, like to truly be seen, seen, known, and loved in the fullest sense, body and soul. And what you're talking about, I just heard like this deep, like reverence to the person, and attentiveness. Those were the two words that came to me, is like, yeah, I don't even know what else to say about that. It's just reverence and attentiveness, and that is true love. I mean, that's like the remedy for use, right? You can't use someone while also like being that attentive to the whole person. You know?
Yes.
Wow. Yes, you do know. You should share. Yes, you can, everyone. Isn't that a political slogan? We don't want to get into that. Anyway, oh my goodness, just absolutely gorgeous. So, yeah, I mean, this is the thing. And of course, there'll be like an entire section at the very end about all the ethics and stuff. But you guys, as you're listening, you can see, I hope, like the beauty of all of this. So, like, there are deep, deep reasons the church teaches what we teach about sexuality and ethics and how we are to live, and it's rooted in the human person, right? Who we are and how we're meant to live and to love. And it's beautiful. It's such a good thing. It is not a burden. Thank you so much for all of that, ladies. You guys are amazing. And but that's all the time we have for this episode. I'm never ready to say that, but we have to end. But we're just, you know what? We have so much more to do together. And next episode, we're going to get into a new section that's entitled "The Heart, Accused or Called," which is found in audiences 44 to 46. So we're not done looking at the heart. We're going to take a close look at some of the views and attitudes that might hinder us from really living our lives in step with the Spirit and experiencing that redemption of our bodies that Jesus came to offer. So know that we are praying for all of you, and we would love if you would pray for us too. But until the next episode, God bless.
Thank you so much for listening. If you have questions or comments, we would love to hear from you. We can be reached by email at befilledpodcast@gmail.com. You can also find us on social media. We are on Facebook and Instagram. There you can find additional encouragement in between episodes. Also, be sure to check out our show description for links to resources we discuss in the show, as well as questions for deeper reflection. Until the next episode, God bless.